Hello there, and welcome to Supply Chain Stories, hosted by myself, Seb Taylor from Portela, where we host fantastic supply chain and logistics leaders to discuss their journey, what they're seeing today and tomorrow, and advice for aspiring leaders. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Raul. He is a senior leader, ex-COO of Helly Hansen, with leadership roles within Burberry, Kingfisher, and most recently within private equity as an operating partner. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Really excited about the conversation. So I think let's dive in. Could you tell me a little bit about your career journey and a little bit about yourself, I guess, as well?
Yeah, for sure. Very happy to do so. I guess the best way to describe my career is in three major experience blocks. I started in different roles in supply chain across different industries, which constituted kind of my executive experience, which I raised all the way up to Chief Operating Officer at Helly Hansen, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about soon, as it was one of the highlights of my career. After that, as you mentioned before, I pivoted a little bit into the private equity world, where by now I've done the different roles. So I've worked for a private equity owned firm. I then worked for a fund. And since then, which is now the final stage in my career, is more my interim experience. And in that interim experience, I've been working quite a lot for the majority of the time with portfolio companies and funds that own those portfolio companies. But the basis, and I guess that's the reason for us to be speaking here today, has always been supply chain and operations has been kind of my area of specialism, and it's an area that I enjoy, that I love, and that I think is quite an inspiration for a lot of people out there. Which I'd be happy to share a little bit my perspectives as we go along in the conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And look, like we said, we've spoken before, like you've had a fantastic career of growth across sort of the end-to-end supply chain, logistics specifically, but also in terms of M&A activity, change, acquisition, growth and expansion as well. I guess maybe just to give people a bit of a flavour, could you talk a little bit about your role and remit at Helly Hansen? And then we can also talk a little bit about the PE role as well, but just good to understand what you were doing there, what was the change, what was the transformation as well?
Yeah, happy to. So the company had been owned previously by three other funds who had their own very specific visions for the company, for the brand. But unfortunately, the brand did not really end up in a pretty good position after those ownerships. So when we came across and took over, the idea was to revamp the brand, to reset the operating end, which was one of the reasons why it wasn't in such a good financial shape. And what that meant was, really integrating the whole of supply chain from planning, sourcing across the entire span. And also integrating technology in a couple of different ways. So complete ERP redesign and revamp in preparation for the implementation of a digital supply chain management solution, which allowed us to control and to have visibility from the moment the purchase orders were created all the way through until fulfillment took place with our customers. So it was a 3-year program, a huge transformation, which included obviously all the other components of transformation, reorganization, design, changing in processes, upgrading skills, globally across different areas in the business, in sourcing and in planning specifically. So very successful transformation. considerable impact onto the bottom line in terms of performance, financial performance. And it led to a very successful exit to, at the time, an acquisition by a big Canadian retail company called Canada Tire.
Yeah, interesting. Wow. Okay. A lot to go in there, and I guess, and what you said, obviously a very successful exit, but what I guess was the sort of end result of all that change? Because it sounds like it was across people, process, systems, and everything. What was the sort of end result from that?
Yeah. So in addition to the EBITDA contribution that resulted from efficiencies in terms of cost. But also in terms of speed to market and increase in fulfillment rates. So when I started in 2015, the company had around 60 to 65% availability rates. When I left, we were above 95%,
Huge, yeah.
quite considerably above that. So what that meant was that from a commercial standpoint, we gained a lot of credibility with our customers. So, and what that meant was that over time, season upon season, the amount of buy that they dedicated to us as a brand increased considerably. We were able to grow with our accounts. We were able to grow geographically. We expanded into the US. So you had the combination of increasing sales and revenues. Much higher than what we had originally planned for, and you had a cost base that was reducing as we in relative terms to revenues. So our margin, our profit levels increased quite considerably, and that's then why that's what drove the very high multiple and the very high exit valuation, which was at the time a really successful case. So
impressive.
Yeah.
Indeed, yeah. Exciting. Yeah. I mean, it's huge. I mean, it's really interesting. And I know we've talked about this recently, just around that commercialization of supply chain and how it's moving much more towards that, bottom line revenue enhancement growth as well. Is that something you're seeing more broadly as well?
Yeah. So I've witnessed that. I've operated in that environment, and I truly believe in it from a couple of different angles, in fact. So first and foremost, when we talk about commercial, right, we must not forget that every supply chain in any industry always has great exposure and visibility towards the client base, because they are connected on a permanent basis with the clients. They understand the rhythm of the client, they understand their processes, and so on. So people in supply chain generally have a great understanding of what really ticks at the customer level, and that gives you a pretty good understanding of how does your contribution to their success, and therefore to revenues and to your margin, play a role in the success of your own company. In addition to that, I think that more and more so, the boundaries, the borders between what you do and what your clients do and what your suppliers do is all kind of getting a little bit faded, right? So there are no longer these clear borders, because in tough times like the ones we've had in the last 5, 6, 7 years, people have realized that it's far better to collaborate, to share, to in many cases even integrate a lot more in terms of data that they share, in terms of how to manage capacity, how to take on additional activities by your suppliers, like research and development and all these other ancillary activities, to be able to overcome the challenges of lead times or changing political landscapes or all these curveballs that we that we have been thrown recently. So in that sense, I think supply chain is no longer only aimed at running an optimal supply chain.
Mm.
Supply chains now are concurrent in the sense that there's always an element of supply chain optimization, right, that you need to run. But at the same time, you have to run a flexible supply chain. You have to run a more agile supply chain, because also different products, different channels, different clients have different needs. So managing these different types of supply chain is also quite key. And all of that is in essence a response or even a vehicle for a commercial involvement and a commercial mindset. So, and obviously at the end of the day, it's all about delivering value, which if you can quantify and if you can translate that into language that your board and your executive team understands, then you are truly a commercial partner, right? Trying to convey what is key to the success of your company, really.
Yeah, agreed. Appreciate you sharing that as well. And I guess on the flip side of that, your most recent role within Alteri Investors, you were an operating partner. Obviously, I think a lot of our audience are going to be really interested, one, in that role itself, but I guess also in the differences between that and portfolio PLC, those sort of things. Could you talk us a little bit through, I guess, that role? But I guess I'll have some follow-up questions to it, but just sort of like maybe the differences between that and other businesses as well.
Yeah. So personally, what attracted me to private equity were three things, which I believe are truly what differentiates private equity from industry in general. So first and foremost, it's the clarity of the mission. So it's very typical that in any investment made by a private equity firm, you will end up having 3 to 4, maybe 5 different value creation levers that become then the focus of that transformation of that company. Of course, this is simplifying things. It's a lot more complex in terms of the KPIs and the different drivers that affect that. But that clarity of a mission is quite key. I've been before in industry where there was also a clear understanding of where the company wanted to go, but you could end up with a transformation that had 200 initiatives, which obviously over time half of them or even more than that would never even get touched, because it was simply impossible to drive that level of transformation. So I think that's one. The second point is that private equity is very clear in terms of its time focus, right? In ideal terms, any investment would be ideal to be exited in a period between 3 to 5 years, so that you can justify a return on the investment. That has not been the case as of recently, but that's for different reasons.
Yeah.
But still, that time element is quite key. If you take the extreme case of, for instance, family-owned companies, that there are a few out there still, investment and time horizons in family-owned companies could easily be 10, 15, 20 years down the line, right? So there's not the same sense of urgency, and therefore, which is then the third point that is different in private equity, is that very clinical approach to things. So anything that does not contribute to those 3, 4, 5 levers of value creation is noise in the system, and will be shut down pretty quickly, because it's just going to take away time and attention from the main drivers. So that very specific analytical mindset, with all the KPIs, with all the reporting, and also the regularity in reviewing performance become quite crucial, right? So, private equity is most probably not going to live on a quarterly rhythm or annual reviews, because in a quarter a lot could happen, a lot of value could be created or destroyed. So there's a sense of urgency in ensuring that the drivers are happening and that the results are coming through. So, having said that, if you think about this very critically, those three things, if applied to any company in industry, could have the same contribution, right? Could have the same impact. It's just that it's a very different mindset, right? That you have to have, which also means that from an organizational point of view, decision making, politics, and so on, it's a very different setup between PE work and traditional work in industry.
Yeah, great insights. I think we work across multitude of different business structures, and the PE is a very interesting model. I think you're right. I think what it is there's a real focus on certain goals, and it's everything to get to those goals. So rather than having 15 or something along those lines, there's an incredibly deliberate focus, and it's a relentless focus on that. Like, where are we? Like these, and it's all, as you described, clinical. There's no get better at this or have an improvement. It is reach this percentage, get to this amount, get all these things through. Like there is, and it's interesting because I think some people thrive in that environment and some people don't. I guess from what you've seen, what are the people that do thrive in that sort of environment? What sort of skill sets do they have? Background, personality type? I know mindset is a big thing, but just interested to hear your view.
Yeah, so I think you have a combination of different perspectives on that. Clearly, people that come from a financial background, have that mindset. It's a little bit more, a winning mindset, and with that, obviously, there's always a sense of urgency and immediate results. So that comes through a lot in that kind of from that kind of area. For people on the operating side, I think what you need is people that are comfortable with change, people that are comfortable with what is required in terms of decision making to drive transformation, which obviously means that you always have to bear in mind the greater good that you are creating in terms of the value for your investors, for the executive team, for the wider company. Which obviously, sometimes you make decisions that have individual impact on people, but still, when you look at the value that is created and how that value is shared, how it's reinvested in other companies, creating additional employment and new opportunities, when you look at it from the wider perspective, it still justifies, right? So I think you have to have this mindset, this personality that is comfortable with change, comfortable with being decisive in terms of impact. But for instance, when you look at certain areas, certainly like supply chain, where decisions, for instance, around doing a network design, right, where you could change your manufacturing locations or your warehouse setup, or where you might need to implement technology, which could easily take 2 or 3 years until it's fully deployed and really reaping the benefits. Sometimes you get a little bit of a shock, right? In the sense that in private equity, ideally you wouldn't want to do that because there's risk involved in that, there's cost involved, there's investment in capital involved, and obviously in the ideal world you wouldn't want to do that. So sometimes certain areas might clash a little bit in terms of these key drivers and what really is the right thing to do for the business, right, in the long run. So it's all about finding the right balance, right, in terms of how to drive value while setting yourself up for longer term benefit as well.
Interesting. Yeah, because I think it's very interesting when, again, it's I don't want to say a short-term mentality, but there's a real focus on that, on the results, on the outcome. But it sounds like for you to succeed in that space, the mindset is key. It sounds like that's a big thing around decision making, ability to understand change, but also its impact. And it sounds like, I think also it's very data led, but you're never going to have all the data, and it's being able to make strong judgments with limited data, whilst also having that financial acumen and understanding to understand the impact.
That's a great insight, a great point. I think that data element is very, very key, and even more so in these days and ages, right, where data is clearly now recognized as a commercial lever as well, right? But also at a time where you have this very interesting conjugation of factors, such as computational power is increasing by the day and becoming really, really cheap. You have then the advent of software technology like LLMs and agentic AI and all of these new developments that allow you to deal not only with huge amounts of data, allow you to find ways to correct the data as you are operating with it, and that helps you understand things that simply before, even through the use of technology that we had as whatever spreadsheets and ERP systems and so on, you were not able to find the true connection between all those data points. So now you have this ability to manipulate, to understand, and to drive pockets of value that before were not available or cheaply available as they are today. So it's clearly a big transformation in general. And then when you put that to the perspective of private equity and value creation, you're adding now a completely new layer that perhaps before wasn't available. And you can do that in very, very short periods of time. So it's the perfect combination, right, to drive additional value with very low investment with a very, very quick turnaround. And I think in supply chain, in particular, given the amount of complexity that you have, from the multiplication of the number of suppliers by the number of touch points that your goods have to go through, from origin to destination, your entire network complexity, with warehouses, different 3PL providers and so on, multiplied by the number of products, the number of channels, number of clients. This is we're talking about a huge data set, right? A huge amount of data points. And in many cases, something that I've spoken many times before, but I don't think people truly can visualize it, is the multilinearity of all of this, right? Is supply chain doesn't really work in an Excel 2D view, right? Because in Excel you have this cell goes into that cell, and then the result goes elsewhere. In supply chain, you could have multiple factors affecting each other simultaneously in ways that are very difficult to model in a 2D environment like Excel, right? So you really need to be able to bring models that can allow you to manage all of this and understand this very quickly. So I think it's one of the most exciting elements for the future, for the next 5-10 years, will be the ability to deal with all of this complexity and drive value out of it. Because I'm convinced, and I've seen it multiple times, the amount of waste that you have, either in terms of time or in resources or latency or misunderstandings, between customers and your company and you and your suppliers. there's huge amounts of value to go for.
Yeah, agreed. And I think we're in a world of data overload, and it's around how do you access, but also use that data as well. We were speaking to one of our other guests previously, and we talk a little bit about how data is used. And at a senior level, you actually get to the point where you have less concrete data, but it's around how do you use that data, gather it to give you the right results as well, so you can make informed decisions as well.
No, totally agreed. And in fact, it's funny you mentioned that, because for me, in general, people from supply chain roles, they live in that complexity, right? They eat and breathe it every day, right? So they understand, and to a certain extent, I think it's even a prerequisite in terms of mindset for people in supply chain, is to be able to feel comfortable in complexity, right? It's something that I call it the engineering mindset. You have to be able to to see beyond the obvious. Now, many times, the downside of that is that people that are comfortable in that fail to be able to zoom that into the 3, 4, 5 key levers. And normally those are financial levers, because at the end of the day, right, you always have to translate everything into financials. There's this transition into talking commercial financial language that I think is something where some people really trip over, right? So if you are able to, as a leader in supply chain, to translate very simply how X, Y, and Z have an impact on a P&L line, I think that's where the conversation at the board level can really flow, right? Because you're able to remove the complexity and explain it in a way that people can relate to, right? Which obviously at the most senior level, we can't expect the CEO or the CFO or a non-executive director to be operating at the purchase order line, right? Or the whatever other relevant data point. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges for people, also in terms of success, in terms of their career development, is to be able to translate complexity into very simple financial and commercial language, which is what then is going to make them succeed at the board level.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because like one of my questions to you was, I guess, how do senior leaders, senior directors, VPs, such along those lines, move to that next level? And it sounds like there's one thing being a supply chain expert, and having that, as you describe it, engineering mindset, but then being able to pull back, translate it into commercial outcomes, but also then be able to simplify it at the basic level to say, this is what we're doing, this is the pain point, this is the challenge, but this is why we need to do it, and this will be the result. And that's then how you can get to that net level. Is that correct? Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Yeah, totally. So, the role you play doesn't have to be circumscribed to supply chain, right? So you can take that commercial and that financial view, and also I would dare say that given that these are normally areas where a huge amount of people are deployed, or alternatively, if it's not people, it's technology. There is also a huge element of talent and technology that are in the plate of the supply chain teams every day, right? So when you put all of that together, that kind of really sets you up in a positive way to be able to make it at the board level, if you are able to translate things into the context that we were describing before. But yes, that financial literacy for me is absolutely key, right? Because your investors, whether it's a PE fund or your banks or other financial partners, they will want to know what does that mean in terms of the three key elements, which is cash, margin, and capital, right? So why would I give you capital to invest? There has to be a return somewhere, right? what does this happen? What does this mean in terms of delivery of margin, right? So whether it's profit or cost, at the individual level, and also how does this help us in terms of cash management? Because obviously, cash is also an element that is important. It's not only necessary to have a profitable business, you also have to have a business that generates free cash flow, right? Because otherwise, no free cash flow, that whole trident starts to fall apart, right? Then you can find yourself in a pickle, and I've seen that happen a few times before, and it's not a nice place to be. And then I think the other point around what we were mentioning before, data and technology. I think that's extremely relevant, not only because there are software solutions that are emerging, but there are also hardware solutions like automatization, robots, and all of these things that very, very soon will become quite cheap, or a lot cheaper than today. And they will play a big role, right, in terms of increasing working hours, increasing productivity, which obviously all of that then translates down to much better financial terms, right?
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. Okay, that's some great. Thank you, Raul. That was great. I was interested as well. We touched on it a little bit there about leaders moving into that senior role, and especially at board level. I guess there'll be some. You've obviously made the move, COO of Helly Hansen, and then you moved into an operating partner within a PE firm. There'll be a number that will be interested to understand that. I know you've touched on quite a few bits, but on that specifically, I guess, what skill sets should people be looking to develop if they want to move into that? And I guess, how should they approach that as well? Would be great to hear your view.
Yeah. Before I get into that, just a little bit of context, because maybe not everybody is familiar with the private equity industry, and by no means I'm not an expert, right? I'm just going to share my honest personal opinion over it, but I think it's important to give the context. There are about, numbers change a little bit, but there are about 16,000 private equity funds in the world. So it's not a handful, it's 16,000, which is quite a lot. And obviously in that, if you apply the usual U curve, right, there are going to be indeed a handful of them, maybe 10 that are mega funds. These are the funds that make not only a huge amount of investments, but they make investments of a huge amount, right? So they could be investments of 10 billion acquisitions of companies, right? So these are the KKRs, Blackstone, CVCs, and those are really big ones. Then after that, you have a significant amount of mid-market funds that could have more than 100 billion in terms of assets under management, but probably don't make that same level of investments, or don't make that many investments, right? They still make a handful of investments per year, perhaps, but not to the same magnitude as the other ones. And then of course, on the fringes, you have smaller funds that are very niche, that invest in specific industries, that invest specific amounts, where to kind of compose that puzzle of investment in the industry. The reason why I'm saying this is because obviously those bigger funds, because they have much higher assets under management, they have much more higher levels of cash to invest, they can afford a different type of structure in their organizations. So what you will find, and again, very simplistically, is you will have certain types of funds that will have operating teams. So all of the funds will have investment teams, but the main point I wanted to make here is that those big funds will have operating teams that could constitute somebody that's responsible for talent, somebody that's responsible for data, somebody that's responsible for technology, somebody who's responsible for supply chain and operations. So you'd have for pricing. So there's a plethora of roles that are very, very deep in terms of their speciality, right, of the topic that they're looking into. And of course, each of these could then have individual teams supporting them and so on. So you have like an own internal consultancy setup, right? Those mid-market funds will probably rely in a combination of more generalist operating partners, so people who are still, performing the transformation of the funds. They're helping the investment teams, working with the portfolio executive teams, and driving and identifying value. But they have a more generalist approach, rather than having a very individual area of expertise. Now, with this context, it's important that if you are coming from a supply chain background and you want to make your transition into that area, I can see two ways of transitioning. If you are truly an industry or a subject matter specialist, if you've been, I don't know, working for Philips or somebody like this, right? That very complex international organizations, thousands of products, and you've developed that industry or subject matter specialism that you're truly a world expert. The transition can be probably more towards the bigger funds, where you then become that subject matter specialist, right? And you have that depth. If you're, somebody that has true end-to-end understanding of supply chain and has done, a lot of transformation roles in that area, you probably can still make the transition into a generalist. But then there, the discussion becomes around what fund would you be working for. And so, to give you an example, let's say that you worked in supply chain in a highly intensive manufacturing background, right? There are PE funds there that invest, for instance, only in industrials, right? So if you have a very significant manufacturing background, you could do that transition into a company like that, right? That does investment in heavy manufacturing, like chemicals or metal production, engines, automotive, automation. All of those areas, you can still probably do that transition. So I have seen a lot of that happening as of recently, where we are at the stage in private equity where the golden ages of easy leverage because of cheap money have come to an end, right? So now the industry is now really going back a little bit to its basics and really having to work very, very hard to drive that additional value, to drive additional margin, right? To really, really turn around companies, doing the hard, heavy lifting that perhaps when money was for free, right, was not so necessary, right? Because you could still make great returns through multiples or through leverage, and not so much through margin. I've actually even been writing on LinkedIn specifically about margin. And just to give you an idea, before 2012, according to Bain, before 2012, multiples, leverage, and margin contributed more or less equally, like 30 base points on value creation, right? On the value that was created. Post 2012, margin is now it's almost zero, right? It's almost
Really?
has had no significance whatsoever in terms of that value creation, in particular for carve-outs. So it's because the multiples were easy to achieve and leverage was cheap. So there was no need. But I think now that trend is changing very, very quickly. And you're starting to see companies now really focusing on the big transformation, the real value creation. So again, my personal view, I think the next 5 to 10 years in private equity will see a lot more, rolling up your sleeves and really going under the hood and turning companies around in a very different way than it was, until now.
Interesting. Interesting. And I guess that's where subject matter experts then can come in and really add that value from their specific knowledge. So it's maybe now it's less so about, call it broad transformation experience, but it's your innate knowledge of sectors, capital expenditure and margin, and how to change that to enable the commerciality of the business.
Correct. That's if I were a betting person, that's where I would put my money on right now.
Wow.
Exactly as you said it. Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. Well, look, I appreciate everything you've said there. I guess, look, one final question from me. We've talked a lot about, operating partners, COOs and stuff like that, but a lot of our listeners will be, early in their stage of career in supply chain logistics, procurement, wherever it may be. I guess from your point of view, if you could give them one piece of advice for them, what would that be to those up and comers?
Yeah, so I think we, that financial literacy, I think is quite key, right? So, you don't necessarily have to do an MBA or, or any advanced studies like that, but truly invest in yourself, right? In developing that financial literacy, making sure that you can translate in very simple ways, the complexity that you deal with into, those relevant business level KPIs. This is not supply chain KPIs. These are business relevant KPIs. Cost, margin, capital utilization. All those key elements is one. Second thing I would say is, make it a daily practice or at least a weekly practice to network, to connect. Not from a personal or career development perspective, but just to keep up with everything that's happening in terms of technology, right? We mentioned data, but software is changing a lot. There's a lot of developments happening on the supplier side that sometimes we don't really take the time to invest in, and that can be significant surprises, right? Everybody's trying to position themselves to take advantage of all these geopolitical changes that are taking place. So really make sure you have time to figure out what's happening in the market, because certain decisions can have a big impact on performance and therefore on the financial value that you can create. And then, the last one I would say is in all of this is also, ensuring that, you develop yourself, right, in terms of your leadership capabilities, because clearly, from a talent perspective, we're already starting to see some challenges there, right, in terms of macro shifts, right, blue collars, white collars, and so on. And then, ensuring that by focusing on yourself, you also are able to understand how best to equip and prepare your teams to deal with all the stuff that we hear every day, right? AI and all these changes that are taking place, which obviously will have a big impact on your setup, on your teams, and on your people, right? So you have to kind of be up to speed with all of these changes, and that starts with you. Starts by understanding how are you able to and capable to cater to the needs of your team. I think are quite important.
Yeah, perfect. Some great advice there. Thank you. And look, that's been so insightful. There's a lot to be taken away from that. I appreciate your time. I know you're busy as well, so thank you for all that. I really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. We could be going on for hours because it's a huge topic with with a lot to cover. But I hope that people can enjoy a perspective. It's not the perspective. It's just it's one perspective. And finally, I would say that it's for those who are looking into the private equity world, or if it happens to come their way, because it could happen, right? Private equity is pretty much they own half of all the companies in the world at the moment, more or less. So this could happen without even being in people's plans. that they look at it as a really interesting asset class, because I think it does have very interesting ways of looking at running companies and delivering value. So keep an open mind, and embrace the opportunity, because it can be a very fulfilling one.
Agreed. And yeah, you may not be interested in private equity, but private equity might be interested in you. So
correct.
So yeah,
That's
it's worth keeping an eye on it with, as you said, with the size of asset class that it's just passed as well.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Raul. Really appreciate your time, and I'll speak to you again very soon.
My pleasure. Thank you.